Welcome to yet another edition of Valley Talk Live. I'm still Jeff Crow. No name changes since last week. Joined here with my esteemed co-host, Mr. Marcus Ruiz Evans.
Thank you, Jeff.
And by way of Santa Barbara, Mr. Robert Stark.
And I'm still not Jeff Crow.
Yeah.
Well, unlucky you. Anyhow, we are joined by a great person, great candidate for Lieutenant Governor of California, Mr. Ron Nehring. Welcome, Ron.
Great to be on. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you. Great to have you. Well, let's start off with you, Marcus, with a couple questions here for Mr. Nehring. After Mr. Nehring kind of tells us a little bit about himself. Go ahead. Floor is yours.
Well, thanks very much, and thanks for the opportunity to talk a little bit about the campaign for Lieutenant Governor here. It's a great year for Republicans to be on the ballot, of course, as the national political environment continues to move in our direction. I served as the chairman of the California Republican Party from 2007 to 2011, and prior to that, I was the chairman of the Republican Party in San Diego. And during that time, I had the opportunity to travel throughout our state, talk about the big issues affecting our state. And since I stepped down as party chairman in 2011, I've remained active and involved. And at this time, I stepped up to run for lieutenant governor.
Right on. Well, let me ask you, Ron. I mean, building on that question, introducing yourself to the public. Why are you running for lieutenant governor? What was the draw for you? What are you hoping to bring that perhaps you don't see existing with the existing lieutenant governorship, or perhaps the other field of other potential candidates? What's the draw, and what do you hope to bring?
Well, I think that every election is an opportunity for us in California to decide whether the state is on the right track or whether we can do better. And at a time that we have the highest poverty rate in the nation, we have the fourth highest unemployment rate in the nation, and we have the highest taxes and sales and income, and some of the worst performing schools in the country, I think we can do better. And we have one party control in Sacramento right now. The Democrats control every statewide office. They control big majorities in the state legislature. And as Republicans, I think we owe it to California to put our ideas on the table, to offer better leadership, a better vision for the future, and a different direction than where the ruling party is taking us right now. I think the lieutenant governor's office is one that should be a platform for developing and advocating for the bold reforms that our state needs in order to restore its competitiveness. Over the last 10 years, we've had 1.5 million Californians net leave our state because of the opportunity deficit that's been created here, and they're leaving the beautiful Pacific coast for the Arizona desert and the Nevada desert and the humidity of Texas. And so there's got to be a pretty big opportunity deficit there to drive folks, to go elsewhere. And I think we have to take a look at the bold reforms that we need in the areas of tax reform, clamping down on the frivolous lawsuits that are killing small businesses in our state, pension reform. We have a $100 billion unfunded pension liability for retiree health care and pensions, and education reform to give parents and students more options and alternatives. And those are ideas that I don't see coming out of the Democrats who are holding statewide office today.
Now, Ron, I used to be the Central Regional Director for what was then the Young Republican Federation California. Now it's called the California Young Republican Federation, I believe. And I know that from looking at your site, they've endorsed you, and a number of the local clubs have too. During the tenure that I was running a pretty good sizable area, one of the things that I noticed was a lot of backbiting and underhandedness within the political party structure. There was, and I used to try to tell people, wait until there's something worth fighting over before these, the internal struggles can happen after there's power to be gained. After you get power, I likened it to a group of Republican mice, if you will, on the ground fighting over the same pieces of cheese, and whoever survives there's Democrat cats waiting on the counter, waiting to swoop up on that one, because that's how it seemed to be. When you were the chair of the party, I'm sure I'm sure you saw some of that yourself. How were you able to build a consensus between the various factions, the more moderate folks, the more conservative, the more libertarian, the different factions within the political party, regional differences, whatever?
Well, when I became the county Republican leader in San Diego, we had a similar problem here. Our committee was badly divided. The committee was in debt. It was not seen as a political force to be reckoned with. We were losing elections. And I ran for chairman and was elected July 9, 2001, on a program that we're going to focus on what we have to do to win elections. We're going to focus on voter registration, turning Republicans out to vote, endorsing and nominating candidates, recruiting the volunteers and the donors needed to make those things happen. And that was going to be our singular focus. And we managed to turn that committee around. Now the Republican Party in San Diego County is one of the most effective in the state. We just elected a Republican mayor, Kevin Faulkner, in San Diego.
Yep.
San Diego is now the largest city in America with a Republican mayor. But that's because we were focused on the things we need to do in order to win, and not focusing on the things that just create needless division. But make no mistake, democracy is often messy. But for Republicans in California, we have no shot of winning statewide elections in this state unless we come together and are united around those principles which bring us together, and then putting together a formidable campaign structure in order to compete with the Democrats and the unions and the trial lawyers on the other team.
Yeah, great job, by the way, with San Diego. And by having Kevin Faulconer elected, you actually, San Diego actually took over Fresno as having the largest city with a Republican mayor, which is good. We're glad to lose that spot, by the way. So anyhow, go ahead, Robert Stark. Go ahead and throw a question to Mr. Ron Naring.
Yes, in regards to states' rights in the 10th Amendment, do you believe that the states still retain any de facto powers or sovereignty independent of Washington and the federal government? One example would be things like Social Security or Medicare, education, and highway and airport infrastructure.
Well, I think that federalism is as important and central a part of our constitutional system as separation of powers or anything else for that matter. And the founders envisioned a federal government of limited power, and as the 10th Amendment reads, that those powers which are not granted to the federal government in a limited fashion are reserved to the states or to the people. I think that's right. I think that's the best approach, and it's a very, very different one than where we see, for example, Europe going today, which is to centralize more and more power in Brussels and move it away from individual nations there. So this is a debate which we have in this country all the time, most recently over Obamacare, where you saw the federalization, in effect, of health insurance in America. And we've already seen the disastrous results that have come about because of that. When we try to run education out of Washington or health care out of Washington, it doesn't work very well. And we should look for those opportunities to have the states take the lead in these areas. I don't use the term states' rights because I feel very strongly that states don't have rights. States are governments. People have rights. Governments have powers. And so we don't want to be in a position where we're advocating for that somehow the government has rights. The government doesn't have rights. People have rights. We have rights as individual citizens. But federalism is how I discuss it because that's the system that the Founding Fathers envisioned. Washington is supposed to do a limited number of things, and those other functions that are not mentioned in the Constitution should be led by the states.
Yeah, there you go. I've got just a couple of questions in regards to the powers of the lieutenant governor. I could be wrong, but from what I understand, lieutenant governor in California becomes the governor, so to speak, when the governor is out of the state. Is that correct?
That's correct. In a number of states, the lieutenant governor assumes all the powers of the governor whenever the governor is physically outside of the state. The most practical effect of that is that if you have an emergency, such as an earthquake, a wildfire, or an incident such as the San Bruno gas explosion, which we had a few years ago when Arnold Schwarzenegger was governor, he was out of the state, Abel Maldonado was the lieutenant governor. He had the full power of the governor's office to work together to coordinate emergency response there and such. And so I think it's an important power for the lieutenant governor to have.
Now, could in theory, let's say you're lieutenant governor under either, let's just say a worst case scenario, Brown is governor still. He gets reelected, which we obviously hope does not happen. But let's say it does. If he's out of state and there's a pending bills on his desk, are you able to veto those things?
Well, yes. The lieutenant governor becomes acting governor and has all the powers of the governor at that time. Now, as a practical matter, if you don't have a good relationship between the governor and the lieutenant governor, the governor is going to do a lot of vacation on the California side of Lake Tahoe and not the Nevada side.
Yes.
Yeah, and then one follow-up, and then we'll go back to Marcus and then Robert. There's been people who have said that, we need to have the lieutenant governor and governor of the same party because of that type of relationship and that type of scenario where if one is out of state, you don't want a person of a different party signing or vetoing legislation that would have gone through. And there's been proposals to actually make it a ticket where whoever the top Republican in the primary is for governor and lieutenant governor automatically run as a ticket. It would lower the cost of the election for both seats because it would be combined. It would be kind of like president, vice president. Have you ever thought about that issue? Or if so, if not, what's your opinion on that idea?
I think there's merit to that, and most states elect their governor and lieutenant governor together. But that's not the system which was adopted here in California, and in 2014 we have to wage this election according to the rules as they currently exist. But I certainly think there's merit to that. Most states do it that way, and of course it's done that way on the federal level.
All right, well, to Marcus and then Mr. Robert Stark.
Ron, as we talked earlier, I've prepared a list of questions based upon articles you've written, and I want to get to that. But you said something right at the beginning that just fascinated me. You talked about how we have the worst schools in California, and yet we have the highest taxes at the same time. What a strange coincidence in that Californians aren't looking at, or we have a real problem with, how do we restore our competitive environment in this state? I'm just blown away by that. That's exactly what I wrote about in my book, California's Next Century 2.0, available at Amazon.
Good plug, Marcus.
Thank you. Sorry. I know it's shameless, but here's the point. In that book, I point out that for basically the last 10 to 15 years, California has had the worst roads, dams, schools, seaports, airports, bridges, levees, and federal buildings. In fact, the Berggruen Institute, in a California Forward article this year, said that just to bring transportation up to the scale it should be, that's not high-speed rail, that's not anything else. That is just to fix all the potholes and get everything up to where we're supposed to be. Because we've done so little maintenance on our infrastructure, on our competitive advantage for our economy, the cost just to get us back to normal is $765 billion. That's not to improve anything. That's just to do maintenance on most of our basic infrastructure. My question to you, Ron, is help me understand the California people. How did we get to a point where Californians didn't recognize that they have the infrastructure on par with West Virginia and the center of Mississippi, some of the poorest regions? Why aren't people aware of we're hemorrhaging hundreds of thousands of people? Companies are leaving. We have literally the worst of everything, according to the federal government, as far as infrastructure goes, and the worst taxes in all of America. This has been going on. This isn't new. This isn't this year. This isn't last year. This is before the recession. We've been in this situation for over 10 years. How do we get this bad? Why aren't we aware? Why aren't people jumping up and down? Why aren't all the candidates talking about restoring our economic prosperity?
Well, that's a great series of questions.
Sorry.
Got to put on the table there.
Sorry.
And let me start by saying it all starts with economic growth. If our state is not economically competitive, then we're not going to have the economic activity that's necessary to generate the tax revenue to pay for the level of work that we need in order to get our infrastructure where it should be,
Yes,
for
sir.
us to move it further so that we have adequate capacity in our state. We have insufficient infrastructure for a state of our population, and we witness the results of that every day, whether it's traffic congestion on the roads or the price of water or the shortages of water, et cetera. We see the results of that. I think part of this is that we had a mentality in Sacramento which said that, if we don't build it, they won't come. But people came here anyway, and we're left with this inadequate infrastructure. There's also been an enormous amount of pressure put on the state government by public employee unions, which result in greater and greater labor costs, more generous pension benefits, and so on, that become unaffordable, to the point where when we were working hard and passing pension reform here in San Diego, we cited an example that a four-star general gets a $149,000 a year pension, but a retired San Diego librarian was getting about $250,000 per year pension. And those type of things are simply unaffordable. The state can't do everything for everyone. We have to have elected officials of courage who will set priorities. The first priority needs to be we need to have a competitive tax, regulatory, and legal structure in the state to foster more economic activity and economic growth. The second thing we need is to have elected officials who are setting priorities to say, okay, the infrastructure, the basic bones of the state in terms of power, water, transportation, border crossings, airports, seaports, all of that needs to be brought up to speed because that contributes to our economic growth as well. And then third, in the area of education, this in California is a mess. And just to highlight the how intractable this problem is and how unwilling the ruling party has been to deal with it. In 2012 at the Miramonte Elementary School in Los Angeles, we had a teacher who pleaded no contest to 23 counts of child molestation. And I will not go into the specifics of what happened there, but these are horrible things that happened.
That's insane.
And this teacher was finally convicted. But they had to be paid off $40,000, $26,000 in back pay, $14,000 in legal bills, plus free health care for life in order to go away. And Senator Padilla, a Democrat, to his credit, introduced a bill to make it easier to take such folks who do bad things and get them off the public payroll sooner. And that bill died in the Democrat-controlled legislature. It died in committee because the California Teachers Association didn't like it. Well, if you can't pass a bill under that circumstance to correct this type of egregious, abuse on the part of someone who's on the public payroll, then you have no moral authority at all on this issue.
That's pretty much when you have to go to the voters.
That if you're sending your child to a school which you're not satisfied with, you should have the ability to send your kid to a different school. And that's a very basic principle, and I think it has to start there.
Yeah, and with these issues that you're talking about, like the ones dying in the Senate, by the way, which we all know there's 3 state senators, Democrats, that are being indicted, under indictment for some very serious things. If they can't pass that, then obviously that's why Hiram Johnson, and the progressives of that era pushed for the ballot initiative so that we, the people, could change that type of stuff. Now, go ahead, Robert. Go ahead and throw a question or two towards our candidate here for Lieutenant Governor, Mr. Ron Nehring.
Yes, this also ties into why infrastructure and education is very expensive. But on our last show, we interviewed a woman, Ellen Brown, who is running for treasurer of California. And part of the reason why infrastructure and education is so expensive is because the government is borrowing money from private banks. And she gave some example. There was a school district in Santa Ana. They were borrowing money. At one point, it was at $1,000 interest. Then eventually it went down to $300 interest. So what she is proposing is a public bank to fund things like education, infrastructure, so the government does not have to borrow money at interest from private banks. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that, number one, we have government that is engaging in too much borrowing to begin with. And I'll give you an example. Here in San Diego County, where I live, They passed $1 billion bond for new buildings and facilities, and the school district chose to spend some of that bond money on buying iPads. Now, those bonds are 30-year bonds. So you're going to be paying off interest and principal for 30 years. Those iPads, the ones that aren't stolen, are going to last about 2 years. And so for the next 28 years after those iPads have long been recycled, you're still going to be paying for them with interest. And that doesn't make any sense. So we have to have some basic principles when it comes to borrowing. One of them is that you should only borrow money for things that are going to last for the life of the bond. Otherwise, you're taking out a mortgage in order to buy furniture that will depreciate rapidly.
Very good analogy. Very good analogy.
Secondly, we need state and local government to pay attention to what their bond rating is, because when they do go out into the markets to borrow money, the worse that bond rating is, which is a reflection of their fiscal responsibility, the more money is going to be paid in interest, and the less is going to be paid on for useful things. In terms of the idea of having a government-run bank to loan money to itself, I think there are inherent problems in that, because ultimately that money is going to have to come from somewhere. Either it's going to be borrowed out of the private sector, or it's going to be taken from people in the form of higher taxes, and then government borrows against itself. But that money is ultimately going to come from somewhere. So I think that the things that are attainable in the immediate term are we need to make sure that we don't see a repeat of something that we also saw in San Diego that made some national headlines in a Poway school district called capital appreciation bonds, where you basically pay very little or nothing on the principal until the very end, and the interest costs just wind up being outrageous. And then we need to hold politicians to a higher level of scrutiny in terms of what they're borrowing money for.
Let me ask you this here. Now, there's a big discussion in our state about what the true deficit is. Governor Brown says there is no deficit. The state legislature seems to want to spend more because they say there is no deficit. In fact, there's a surplus. The minority party, the Republicans, say we don't have a true surplus or balanced budget. Do you have any gross figures, numbers that you can think of that we are truly out of whack with in Sacramento?
Yeah, well, the first number that comes to mind is that we have about $100 billion in retiree, that is state retiree, people who work for the state, pension and health care obligations that are unfunded. In other words, there's no identified revenue stream to pay for these obligations. And that's a fact. And so that's a $100 billion problem that's hanging out there. Wow. So, of course, the ruling party is busy, working to spend money as quickly as possible. But the reality is that we still have these big unfunded liabilities. On top of that, we have plenty of money in bonds that are still floating out there, which we're paying interest and principal on. So we may not have a year-to-year budget deficit as Sacramento chooses to calculate it, but you still have massive debts hanging out there, which you still have to pay for. And the proper thing to do is a couple things. One is we need for the state pension system to follow the model that we have in San Diego and move state workers on a prospective basis into a 401k style pension system, which the private sector has done long ago. This is what companies like Toyota did, and companies like General Motors did not, and that's why Toyota didn't need a bailout and General Motors did. Those pensions are fully funded, they're fully portable, and there's no unfunded liability that the state has to carry, going forward. So that's a partial solution there. And then you have to identify a source of funding to pay down the unfunded liabilities that have already accumulated. I have not seen a plan coming out of Sacramento to accomplish that.
Yeah, and it seems like that they've tried tax increases. There's been actually a lot of tax increases on the ballot over the last 20 years, including tobacco taxes that have been shot down by the voters. Now, some taxes have been passed, but the vast majority of the voters don't even want. So what it seems like the fallback method is, let's put a bond on the ballot. because bond seems like a really nice word. It doesn't
Exactly.
Yeah, it doesn't imply what it really is. That it's an expense for government. It's spending, and
Yep.
you know, and one thing I'll give
credit card.
Yeah, exactly. One thing I will give Governor Brown's father is he spent a lot of money, but at least we have a highway system to show for it. We have 20 universities, whatever we got from the 1950s and 60s, and then from Ronald Reagan from there to Brown now his first term or his first set of 2 terms, et cetera, et cetera. We now the tax and spend liberal is just spending on things that you cannot see and will not be here 50 years from now.
Intangibles.
So it's just an observation.
Right. And as I served as a school board member here in my own county, and I saw firsthand a lot of the silliness which comes out of Sacramento. We have a law that was signed by Gray Davis as kind of a payoff to the public employee unions that meant that school districts, it's virtually impossible for school districts now to contract out for non-instructional services like landscaping, busing, and cafeteria services. Now, why can't we trust our elected school boards to make that decision? If I don't see what the compelling government reason is that the folks who work in the cafeteria must be government employees as opposed to working for a catering company, for example. Or why is the guy who's mowing the lawn outside of the school, why does that person have to be a government employee if the school district can determine, well, if we contract out the local landscaping company, we can save some money and put more of that money in the classroom, right? That makes sense. But we have all types of laws like this that force government to spend money in irrational ways, which don't occur in the private sector, but because politics gets involved, we see it happen in government.
Certainly. Go ahead, Marcus.
Well, I wanted to build a follow-up question on what you just said. I've been reading some articles on this 6 states idea, break the state up into 6 states, and then there was an earlier idea, break the state up north-south. And what occurs to me is when you look between the lines in these articles, while these people are proposing break California up into 6 states, 2 states, east, west, north, south, what they always name, no matter what they're proposing, is the exact same problem. And that's that they think that Sacramento has too much power, and they believe that more power needs to go to the local areas and the counties, and they think that there's been a shift of too much power from at least the 1960s, 1970s, Pat Brown era, from the counties where they used to have more power and more control over their own funding, and maybe Proposition 13, the school funding one?
Prop 13 would be the tax initiative that kept taxes down for homeowners.
Yeah, that a inadvertent side effect of that was that now a lot of the education funding came from Sacramento. Money's power. So now Sacramento has a lot more concentrated power in their capital than an average state.
They get to make the rules if they're putting the money in, right? That's their mentality of the government.
Yeah, so we're getting on, you mentioned local power, and we're talking about making the state of California competitive. You're running for lieutenant governor. You're talking about how to make the state better. Is there anything to the concept that maybe there needs to be more power returned to the local level, to the county level, perhaps on just specific issues? And you mentioned the school districts and lawnmower man. How much of this is an issue is behind the woes we see in our state?
Well, I've participated in debates on this subject or discussions on this subject for a long time, and here's my take on it.
Okay.
Local government in California is some of the most oppressive, annoying government that you're ever going to find.
Okay.
Yeah. Local government is down the street from you, and they know where you live. Right? Sacramento government is far away. Washington, D.C. government is even further away. But local government, they're kind of right there in your neighborhood. Right?
Huh.
So I'm always cautious and skeptical about saying we need to give local government more power. Local government has plenty of power already. But I
Huh.
Right now, it is, if you were to draw an org chart as to who is responsible for education in California, no one would be able to make any sense of it.
Good
Is
point.
it the legislature? Is it the governor? Is it the superintendent of public instruction? Is it the state board of regents? Is it the county boards of education? Is it the local education board? Nobody knows who's responsible for education in California. And
Right.
that's part of the problem. You have Jerry Brown, who's talked about more local control, but we haven't seen that really turn into anything. We still have these state laws that are forcing school districts to spend money in irrational ways. And so if we're talking in specific cases about empowering our local school boards and transferring authority and responsibility for education from the state back to the local school boards, I think that makes sense. When it comes to, do we want to make it easier for local governments to get even deeper into debt and raise their taxes even higher? I'm not sure I want to do that.
Yeah, good point. If local government had even more power, then your last mayor of San Diego would have really run amok. But I had to throw that in. That was too good, too easy. Let me give you a follow-up, and then Robert throw you a few questions. Now, one of your good friends, who's a good friend of ours, Mr. Tom McClintock, Congressman Tom McClintock, I remember an article from quite some time ago where he took the amount that we spend per pupil on education and broke it down and was able to make some sense of it, and he pointed out that a large portion of that is going to bureaucrats in Sacramento that are making $250,000, $300,000, whatever a year to push pencils. And he broke it down to where if the money went to the classroom, a classroom of, let's say, 30 kids, every kid could be supplied with a gym membership for PE at the best gyms we have in California. Every kid would have a new computer every year, laptop, iPhones, all that kind of stuff. The technology and the things that the kids would actually have if it was in a classroom would be astounding. They would have grade A facilities for every single thing they do. Always have new uniforms every year for this and that, for sports, nothing getting cut. And the teacher could actually make the same as an associate professor at a CSU university, which is more than what they make now, more than double sometimes. So, obviously, yes, it does need to get down to the local level. How do we smash the bureaucracy? How do we do it?
Well, I think part of the challenge is structural, in that right now we don't really have a lot of people in Sacramento who are looking at big, bold reform in any of these areas, whether it's schools or pension reform or tax reform or legal reform, for example. The legislature tends to be caught up in the day-to-day myopia, sausage grind, of the legislative process. The governor's focused on whatever he's focused on the day-to-day operation of state government, and you don't really have much of Sacramento looking at, what would we design a tax system to look like if we had to start over with a pro-growth, competitive tax system in California? You don't really have anybody thinking in those terms. And that's what, I think the lieutenant governor's office should be turned into. Certainly, if I'm elected lieutenant governor, that's what we're going to do. That's what we're going to focus on. The lieutenant governor's office is statutorily weak. It means there's plenty of hours in the work week to focus on this. That's what we should focus on. We should focus on these big, broad issues, work with people from all backgrounds to do our best to develop plans and blueprints for this, and then go out and advocate for it, because no one's doing it now.
Good point. You would have plenty of time as lieutenant governor, and, basically as lieutenant governor, you're either waiting for the governor to leave the state or get into trouble and resign or something. So, you've got a lot of time on your hand to spread these ideas. That's a good point. Anyhow, Robert, go ahead and spend a little bit of time, throw a couple questions to Mr. Naring's way.
Where do you stand on homeland security and infringements against not merely states' rights, but individual human rights enacted and made law by the federal Congress, such as the Patriot Act of 2001, the Real ID Act of 2006, and the National Defense Authorization Act of 2012. Would you support the abolition of the Department of Homeland Security, and do you believe the DHS is constitutional?
Well, I think you raise a number of different issues, which are all centered on the federal government. And so I'm not running for federal office, but I do have opinions on some of these matters. Certainly what we've seen in many of these respects is simply an overreaction and kind of a typical government approach to solving some of these problems. And look, the 9/11 attacks certainly highlighted certain weaknesses in terms of our intelligence capability, in terms of recognizing that Al Qaeda and other terror groups were at war with the United States, but we were not at war with them, and they exploited those certain vulnerabilities. Those were made clear in the 9/11 Commission report. But in typical kind of bureaucratic fashion, we're now left with a lot of rules, for example, which don't really make a lot of sense. And anybody who flies on an aircraft, these days knows about that. I've traveled to 30 countries around the world. I do a lot of work helping to promote democracy and do training around the world. So I've been kind of in and out of the world's airports. And ironically, I find that the Europeans have a much more rational approach to this than the TSA and the government does here. And so I think that's unfortunate. The Obama administration pushed to unionize those folks at the Transportation Security Administration, the folks in the blue uniforms, and that has not necessarily done very much in order to help a very low retention rate, very high turnover rate, and then all of these, we every week it seems like we hear another story about, someone's poor grandmother who's, being, patted down and, groped and such by these officers who, they're just trying to do their job as well, but the reality is that the rules that they're abiding by, just don't make a lot of sense. The two things that happened post 9/11 that did the greatest to contribute to security in terms of air transportation, for example, are number one, reinforcing cockpit doors, and number two is passenger awareness. If people do kind of the type of things on airplanes now that happened, on 9/11, people would be aware, and those folks are going to, are not going to be successful because people were sensitized to that. Much of the other stuff just is excessive and doesn't really make a lot of sense.
Right.
I'm not saying all of it doesn't, but I'm saying that there's plenty that doesn't.
In the so-called land of the free, home of the brave, we're becoming a real prison planet. Do you believe that California needs to build more prisons or just decrease the overall prison population?
Well, we have something on the books right now called AB 109, and that is a law that was signed by Jerry Brown kind of late into the night, and a lot of folks didn't really understand what AB 109 results in. And what this was kind of a scheme to address, overcrowding in the prisons because there was a federal lawsuit brought about conditions in California prisons which are vastly, overpopulated. The result of this law, the result of AB 109, is that many prisoners and convicted criminals who should be in a state facility, a state prison, are now being housed in county jails. And there's a big difference between a state prison and county jails that most people don't, fully appreciate. And that is, a state prison is built for long-term incarceration from people who have, committed serious crimes. And your county jails are built as short-term detention facilities while someone is awaiting trial or while someone is awaiting to be transferred to state prison or, things like that. They're not built for long-term sentences and incarceration. And the state promised to give the counties money to kind of retrofit their jails and so on, but that can only really go so far because you can only, you can only retrofit those facilities so far, and you can't really turn them into a state prison. So AB 109 is a serious problem. I think this law needs to be repealed, and people should be behind bars when they commit serious crimes. If they don't commit serious crimes, then their alternatives can be identified. That's happening right now, but not at the expense of public safety.
Yeah, and follow up to Robert's question. In fact, I saw something on TV that where inmates here in Fresno who would normally have gone back to prison, but instead are serving 6-7 years locally, actually were complaining too that they weren't going to a state facility because they recognize also that the county jail was intended for short-term incarceration. They don't have all the yard time. They complained about the conditions. They talked about how state facilities tended to have better food. They had yard time. They had exercise time, whereas the county jails can't do that. And it also is bringing some of the county jails being a short-term place for higher level misdemeanor offenders, maybe lower level felony offenders with a year or less. Originally, the mentality of the state prisons that we know in California, anybody who's ever seen a documentary knows that California state prisons have racial and gang issues big time. It's bringing that mentality into our county jails and corrupting the county jails population. So lower level inmates who are reformable are now being exposed to the gang leader types and those types that and it could have the effect, AB 109, of actually making guys that are first-time offenders and whatnot worse than before. And any comments in regards to that the effect on society in the long term from what could happen with that situation?
Well, I think that's right. But on top of that, you have many of the folks who are manning or staffing those county jails do not have the same type of training as the correctional officers do at state prisons. And so they're less well equipped to deal with these type of challenges. And it's not something that money alone from the state to the counties is going to be able to solve. So we have public safety that's being jeopardized because some people are not behind bars who should be, who are dangerous, violent criminals who are not behind bars when they should be. And we have also weakened our local prosecutors when they're going after some of these gang members or people who are committing violent crimes. Because in the past, the local law enforcement had the ability to hold over these criminals. Look, you could wind up going back to jail for this, and this. But now that those offenses no longer result in a sentence at state prison, the word gets out on the street pretty quick, and this is a real problem. I mean, you've seen an uptick in crime, according to the FBI crime statistics, in some regions of the state. I expect that will continue as you have more people who are merely on probation as opposed to, being behind bars. And there's some crimes that were, labeled as non-violent, non-serious, non-sexual crimes when in fact they are, like property burglary.
You're talking especially a hot prowl where a person enters somebody's home and they are there. It's that's potentially explosive. I've seen that's on the nonviolent crime list is in particular. Now with drug offenses, and mainly like the marijuana offenses, maybe there's rehabilitation possibly with that, in my opinion, and I've heard a lot of other conservatives say that they would be willing to work within that area. And I'm not talking about the guy that stole your lawnmower or stole your car and sold it off to a fencing operation in order to obtain drug money. I'm talking about somebody possession or whatever amount. Maybe those folks. Yeah, certainly we can limit the number there. That's my personal opinion. What would you agree with that type of thing? We have to lower it somewhere. Well, the courts are mandating it, even the Supreme Court. Where would you do it? Would you do it with the drug offenders? I would say gun offenders, too, when it comes to regular guys who are caught with a weapon that no longer fits California's massive gun control laws. Wow, the clip had 2 extra bullets in it, and those technicality laws. Where would you go with the types of crimes that you would go ahead and say, okay, let's do rehabilitation, probation, alternative sentencing?
Well, I think you have to take a look at that on a case-by-case basis and in dealing with specific types of crimes, and do that in consultation with local law enforcement, which, by the way, was not closely consulted with when AB 109 was passed. And that's why they've had to make dozens and dozens of changes to the law, because it was so unworkable as it was originally passed. I'm not of the sense that we need to go looking to solve this problem by turning criminal activities, into non-criminal activities. I think the way we have to do it is we have to say, okay, in a deliberate way, what type of crimes really are serious or violent or sexual in nature, and that definition needs to be carefully determined, which it's not right now. And we need to have adequate prison space for a population of the size of California. We have people who are doing bad things. And if there's not enough space, then we need to build the appropriate amount of space.
Okay, go ahead and finish your last answer. You were talking about the you were talking about the space that would be needed for that.
Yeah, I think we have to be very practical about this. In that earlier in the show, we were talking about how we don't have adequate infrastructure in our state, transportation, seaports, airports, power grid, water, etc. That's true. And we also do not have adequate prison space at the state level for the number of offenders we have, and that's what resulted in this federal lawsuit over the prison conditions. And those federal judges have repeatedly ruled against the state of California because you have prisons that are way over capacity, and people who are being bunked up in gyms and all types of places which were not designed to house them. And it's irresponsible for the state to continue in this way and not have the amount of space for a state of the population that we have.
All right, go ahead, Marcus, if you have a question for Mr. Naring.
Ron, I promised that I was going to ask you some questions based upon articles you wrote, and let me be a man of my word eventually. So you were chairman of the California State Republican Party from 2007 to 2011?
Yep.
And before that, you were chairman of the San Diego Republican Party?
I was. I'm sitting in our county Republican Party headquarters right now.
So in 2013, at Ron Naring Labs, a website on strategy and political technology, I recommend everybody check it out, good articles, you wrote an article called Measuring a Party Chairman's Success in the 2014 Cycle, and that came out in February 2013. In that article, you mentioned that there were 5 main criteria that were, I think the best word is fair. Part of the article you talked about, well, what can you really expect out of party chairman and what is an unrealistic expectation? But you said, here's 5 things that we can grade that's fair to grade a party chairman on. The financial condition of the organization, the personnel built up in the organization, recruiting staff, the programs that were built, the infrastructure to get out voters, get out the vote. And then the 4th one was, what do you leave behind? And I view that kind of as also similar to the 5th point you made, which is the culture of the organization. How well do you think that you did on these criteria when you were state party chairman? And what skill sets did you use or develop or show while party chairman that are going to be key to making you a good candidate for lieutenant governor?
Well, that's really a great question, and let me give you a little bit more background. On the day that I became California Republican Party chairman in 2007, the State Republican Party was $4.7 million in debt, and that was leftover debt from Arnold Schwarzenegger's reelection, and that's what I started with, was leftover from my predecessor. And I determined that there is no way that I was going to turn over a similar mess to my successor. So we had to make sure that we got out of that debt and that we put in place the structure necessary so that that debt would not be reincurred. And I got to tell you, there's enormous institutional pressure within a political party to spend the party into the red. You've got all types of political consultants and people who make commissions and so on. Nobody makes a commission on monies that's not spent. And so dealing with those type of institutional pressures, I think, is an important skill set for any type of executive. And we succeeded. On the day that I left as chairman, the state Republican Party had over $400,000 in cash, no debt, no bills, a small staff, and we were on a financially sustainable trajectory. And I think that was probably my number one accomplishment, was to make sure that the Republican Party was no longer in the red here in California.
Yeah, I would find it a little ironic, and I'm sure my co-hosts and the audience would agree, that how could the Republican Party say they're the party of fiscal responsibility in government if they don't even balance their own budget internally? So,
that's exactly right. That's exactly right.
There'd be just a tad of hypocrisy with that one. We've got about 6 minutes left. Give us an idea of where you've been throughout the state and what you're hearing and, all that great stuff, all the fun stuff of campaigning.
Well, it's a really big state. It's something which I got to know very well when I was state Republican leader. And sometimes it's cheaper to be able to fly to Washington than it is to be able to fly up north to Crescent City or elsewhere.
Oh, yeah.
North of San Francisco. So it's a big state. It's a diverse state. I do a lot of driving because I can do numerous events along the way as opposed to just having to fly everywhere. And just last week I drove back from San Jose to San Diego on Easter, actually, and drove down the coast and then into the Central Valley. Lots of signs there. People very, very upset about the government-created water crisis.
Oh, yeah. It's all over 99 and I-5 here.
But the inadequate response to the drought has been, government-created, in that the impact of the drought is worse because we had not built the necessary infrastructure for water, storage and conveyance. And then driving through Tehachapi, going around L.A. to avoid all of that traffic, coming back, down the 15. We have such an incredibly diverse state that's so big and so rich in terms of what it has to offer, and such great people who you meet along the way. And I think that the folks who I meet on the campaign trail, they deserve better than what's coming out of Sacramento today. This is the greatest state in the country. It is the most diverse state. It's not just the biggest, but it's the most diverse state. We have probably the most innovative state in the country. And we can do better than what's coming out of Sacramento today. And that's kind of inspiring to do this.
Yeah, absolutely. We could do, I think a kindergarten class could probably do better than Sacramento these days. But we've got about 4 minutes left. Go ahead and let everybody know how to get a hold of you, all the different websites, and what you might be having events coming up and whatnot. Go ahead and rub it in.
Well, we have a great website at ronnearing.com. That's at RONNEHRING.com, and folks can sign up there for updates and see a little bit more information about me. But sign up on the email list so that you can get updates directly from the campaign about events that we have going on and so on. We have information there on the positions on various issues and so on are all up there. As well. We really wanted to make it a good resource for everybody. And we're going to continue to travel around the state. And if folks want to have us come to their event, we have a schedule contact form there. If people want to, we do all types of events all the time, everything from radio interviews, obviously, to Rotary clubs and everything in between.
Awesome. Okay, folks, as you heard Mr. Nearing say, and I shall repeat, you can go to his website, which is ronnearing.com. It's RONNEHRING.com. I've been to the site. If you look at it, you'll see that I used to say, I got to stop saying state senator. Congressman Tom McClintock is a supporter. Multiple members of the California Republican Party state senators, as well as the state assembly folks, including the two leaders, I believe, or one of the former state senate leaders is a part of the campaign. I believe it's Hollingsworth. And then there's quite a few great organizations that are supporting Mr. Naring. The grassroots organizations are, and it gets into a very broad, in-depth. If you look at the issues, if you read those, you will clearly see that Mr. Naring knows what he's talking about, and we just encourage you to make sure that you do go there. Again, that's ronnehring.com, RONNEHRING.com. And we got in the last minute and a half, Ron, go ahead and say anything else you'd like to throw out there for the crowd.
Well, I think that every day this is getting to be a better and better year for Republicans to be on the ballot. I think we're going to have a great year in November. The national political environment continues to move in our direction every single day. People are upset about the so-called economic recovery. That is where we still have sky-high unemployment. We have people who are very upset about Obamacare. 1 million Californians having their insurance policies canceled, more cancellations coming on the way. This is a year for us to offer a better alternative for the Democrats, and I'm glad we're going to be on the ballot. If you need more information, visit ronnehring.com, and if you need even more information that's on the website, send us an email, and we'll respond to you right away.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, folks, we're down to our 1 minute countdown, and again, ronnehring.com. Mr. Naring's inviting you to go to his site. He's telling you to subscribe to his email alerts, which I think, Marcus, you're doing right now, huh? Well, good job, buddy.
Yeah, the website's good. There's a great article there on talking about the culture of corruption in Sacramento. I just think that's interesting for anybody that's looking to talk about that with Leland Yee, et cetera.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, again, ronnehring.com, and take a look at the different articles. Subscribe to his email alerts, and you have an open door, right, Mr. Naring, to anybody that'd like to have you at their event.
You bet.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today on behalf of Marcus and Robert.
Thank you, Ron.
And our guest, we are out.